Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Danadasa, as Rachel mentioned, and it's lovely to be back. I'm not sure how long it's been. I was saying to Hal, it's however long it's been too long. So it's really lovely to be back here with all of you. And what I'll be talking about today is, actually today and also next week as well, I'll be talking about the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the sutta which is commonly translated as the four foundations of mindfulness. Now this sutta is actually, it's quite vast. It covers a tremendous amount of ground. So I'll just be focusing in on a couple aspects associated with this particular sutta. And I'd actually like to start with just a brief little reflection, an opportunity for us to all sit quietly and just consider what I've put up here on this chart behind me. So there are two diagrams there. On the top is a depiction of the distracted mind, and on the bottom is a depiction of the unified mind. And there's a quote there by Yogi Berra, who's he's a national baseball player and manager, and he's known for his kitchen table wisdom. And his quotes seem to keep finding their ways into my talks. But I love this one. It says, if you don't know where you are going, you might wind up somewhere else. So you can kind of see the arrows they're just doing whatever they're doing. And in the bottom diagram is an image of the unified mind. And as you can see, the arrows are all moving in the same direction. Of course, the implication there is we actually know where we're going, which may or may not be the case. And we also know how to go about getting there. We know how to align our inspiration, our energies, make wise decisions to actually move us in that particular direction. The unified mind. So what I'd like to do is I'd like us all to sit quietly for a few minutes, and I'm just going to drop these two questions for reflection into our minds. And it's very interesting, questions like this. What is your heart's deepest wish? And how are you bringing this to fruition? When we ask these sorts of questions, what may happen for some of us is we may have an answer readily at hand. For instance, my heart's deepest wish is to get rid of greed, hatred, and delusion, or to help all beings, or something like that. So if you happen to have a response that's quick at hand, that's great. And what I'd like to invite you to do is just to take that response and set it to the side and just simply ask, what else is there? Just to look again. And also, if a response does not come to mind to these two questions, you may notice how that feels to not know. Perhaps you might feel anxious, maybe not. But that's also a really interesting thing to notice. So let's just sit quietly for a few minutes, and I'll just read out these two questions. What is your heart's deepest wish? And what are you doing to bring this to fruition? I wonder if anyone would like to share what arose for you in regards to these two questions. Oh, could you say your name as well?
My name is Bob.
Bob.
I would love to be able to do away with the parts of myself which prevent me from being more in touch with the parts of me that I'm glad I have and appreciate, that help others. And what I'm doing, other than coming here week after week, I'm afraid nothing.
Thank you, Bob.
Hi, yes, I'm Roger, and what came to mind distinctly for me was that I want to go back to being that, perfect child that came into the world that didn't have things blocking him, with the knowing but not having these things block me, and just feel free and open and full of wonder and ease, curiosity.
Thank you, Roger. Anyone else? I quite like these words that you use, Roger. Wonder and ease, free and open, no blockages. Also, Bob, what you said as well, being more in touch with what you feel are your positive qualities. So the Satipatthana Sutta, this is a teaching from the Pali Canon, which is the oldest recorded history of what the Buddha taught. And this word sati is translated as mindfulness or awareness, and this word patthana, it's translated as placing near or attending. So satipatthana, one translation for it is attending with mindfulness. Attending with mindfulness. So this Satipatthana Sutta, it's frequently translated as the four foundations of mindfulness. So this attending with mindfulness to four spheres of experience, we may say. And I'll be talking about what those four spheres are. But to start with an introductory, the Buddha, when he taught this to his monks, he referred to this Satipatthana Sutta as the direct path of purification that leads to complete liberation. So again, it's the Buddha referred to as the direct path to liberation, not a direct path, but the direct path to liberation. Which is quite striking. Those are very strong words. So I'd actually like to read to you exactly what the Buddha wrote, what the Buddha said. He didn't write. In regards to the Satipatthana Sutta. So he repeats this stanza at the beginning of the sutta and also again at the end, this particular refrain. Monks, this is the direct path to purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of dukkha and discontent, for acquiring the true method for the realization of nibbana, namely the four satipatthanas. Right, so this quote, it begs a couple questions. What is Nibbana? Or what does that mean? What's that? The path of purification, the realization of Nibbana. And, or Nirvana, Nirvana, it's the same thing. And Nirvana is, it's quite hard to talk about, but we are going to talk about it, actually, next week. But I'll touch upon it. The reason it can be so difficult to talk about Nirvana is because the frame of reference is outside of our normal waking consciousness, our normal ordinary consciousness. So what do I mean by this? So I picked this little way of talking about it from Prasada Chitta, who I know many of you know because he comes and speaks to you. And he used this example in terms of a frame of reference. Let's say I were to say to you, this morning I went to the grocery store. You would all probably know what I was talking about because you've all probably gone to the grocery store. So when I use this language, it can map to a shared experience and we all know what we're talking about. Then along comes the Buddha and he says, oh, I'm enlightened, I'm fully liberated, I have achieved nirvana. And if we were to ask the Buddha, well, what do you mean by that? Well, how would he go about describing it? And would we actually be able to understand what exactly it was he was saying? So here's one response to this question when the Buddha was asked about the nature of nirvana. Where water, earth, heat, air, no footing found. There burns not any light, nor shines the sun. The moon sheds not her radiant beams. The hum of darkness is not there. When in deep silent hours of thought, the holy sage to truth attains, then is he free from joy and pain, from form and formless worlds released. Got it? So he's like speaking in riddles here. And actually when you read descriptions of nirvana, complete liberation in the Pali Canon, this is the way it tends to sound. It's like, what? What on earth are you talking about? So we're actually not going to be talking specifically about nirvana next week. I'm going to leave this for next week. But rather we're going to talk about a spectrum of experience from suffering, from unsatisfactoriness, just there, and a spectrum that leads, at one end of the spectrum is just suffering, at the other end of the spectrum is complete liberation. Now we're talking about a movement along this spectrum, a movement towards liberation. We can get these little glimpses of freedom, to use Roger's words, glimpses of wonder, glimpses of ease, that sort of thing. Okay, so now moving into the Satipatthana Sutta. So, can everybody see this? No? I'll also be reading this. I didn't write too big on this. So it starts up here with the Satipatthana Sutta. And I just wrote this translation of Satipatthana, which I particularly like. Attending with mindfulness to these four abides of mindfulness, or these four spheres of experience, or four frames of reference. Language is a little kind of slippery when it comes to this. So in terms of these four foundations of mindfulness, there are four that are listed in this sutta. So the Buddha starts with the body, and then moves on to feeling tone, which I like to just kind of refer to the heart, or emotional lines. The body, feeling tone, the mind, the world of thoughts, all the narratives that we have. And the fourth foundation is what are referred to as dhammas. And again, this word is very slippery to define as well. So the standard definition for dhammas is mental objects, which sheds very little light on actually what's being pointed at here. So during this week and also next week, we're actually going to be focused on this fourth foundation of mindfulness, of dhammas. So before I attempt to define this word, dhammas, I'll just read you the list of categories of experience that the Buddha describes in this fourth foundation of mindfulness. He starts with the 5 hindrances, then he moves on to what are called the 5 aggregates, or the 5 skandhas. After that, he describes the 6 sense spheres. After that, the 7 awakening factors. Then he concludes the list with the 4 noble truths. So it makes sense that there's a lot here, especially since he referred to this as the path, the direct path to purification. So it must encapsulate the essential teachings of the Buddha that lead to liberation. So this is quite a long list. And we're actually only going to focus on a couple elements of this list. We're going to focus on the hindrances, and we're also going to be spending some time with the awakening factors. And then we'll also be speaking about this notion of liberation as well. So what does this word dhammas mean? Well, there's the Buddhist teachings. This is one translation for this word. It has many different translations. So the Buddha Dharma would refer to the teachings of the Buddha. And Dhamma can also be translated here as truth. And it can also be translated as mental objects or categories of phenomenon, categories of experience. So what this word is really getting at is categories of experience is in the right ballpark. So if we look at this list, there's the 5 hindrances, which I'll be going into more detail just a little bit later on. So these we could call our categories of experience. Same with the 7 factors of awakening, categories of experience, 5 aggregates. But then when we enter into actually exploring this sutta in more depth, what the Buddha is really speaking about is not just these categories of experience, but rather he's talking about them through the lens of what's called praticit samuppada. So praticit samuppada, this is one of the absolute core teachings of the Buddha, and this is commonly translated as conditioned co-arising or conditioned co-production, something like that. Again, translations tend to be quite clunky. So to put this teaching, praticit samuppada, very simply, all this teaching says is that everything arises based upon conditions. So the simplest formulation is, in the presence of A, B arises. When A is absent, B does not arise. So everything arises based upon conditions. So it will become clear why this is important. So I apologize. There's a lot of intellectual scaffolding. I need to lay some framework, lay some groundwork down before we get into some much more practical terrain with this. So I apologize if this sounds kind of technical. It's going to get much more practical in just a moment. So in terms of the dhammas, these categories of experience and how they interact with each other, it's probably a good way to put it. The Buddha begins with the 5 hindrances. So he invites all the monks who's listening to him, who's receiving this teaching, is to investigate your experience through the lens of the 5 hindrances. So one question is, why did the Buddha start with the 5 hindrances? And I'll just read this quote. It's from the Buddha. These 5 hindrances are makers of blindness, causing lack of vision, causing lack of knowledge, detrimental to wisdom, tending to vexation, leading away from nibbana. So I'm going to read this one more time. This is very, very strong language here. These 5 hindrances are makers of blindness, causing lack of vision, causing lack of knowledge, detrimental to wisdom, tending to vexation, leading away from nibbana. So these 5 hindrances, they hinder our ability to actually become free. So they hinder our ability to feel wonder and to feel ease. Right, so the very first skill that's being pointed out here is the ability to respond creatively to these 5 hindrances. And the response first requires us to know what they are and to recognize them, to know when they're present, when they're not present. So let's start with that in terms of what are the 5 hindrances. So I've written them down here on the bottom. And the 5 hindrances are, in the middle, doubt and indecision. And then on the left and the right, we've got ill will and aversion. And over here, desire for sense pleasure or craving. So traditionally this would be hatred. This would be greed. And then top and bottom, we've got sloth and torpor, just sluggishness, sloth and torpor, and restlessness and worry. So these are what are traditionally called the 5 hindrances. These are the things that actually block us from freedom. And then sort of moving up, I've got this dashed line here in the middle. And I've written this word access concentration here. So this here is a transition point between a distracted mind, call it down here on the bottom, and a unified mind, or a concentrated mind, which is what I'm describing here on the top. So on the left here, I've just got a spectrum of experience, where down at the bottom, it says more distracted, more contracted, more fixated. And as we move up into access concentration and full-blown dhyana, up here I've written more concentrated, more spacious, and more flexible. So what happens when we make this transition into access concentration? Well, the first thing that arises is we can notice that in concentration, in abiding, in dhyana, the 5 hindrances are absent, completely absent. And what arises are what are called the 5 factors of dhyana. There's applied thought, sustained thought, rapture, bliss, and one-pointedness. So rather than me saying anything about the definitions of these, I'd actually like to speak about these quite experientially. So it kind of looks like this is real technical up here. Well, it actually kind of is. But in fact, most people that I've spoken to have had a sense of this transition from a distracted mind to a mind that's much more unified. So I think we all know what a distracted mind feels like and looks like. It's just the circus of the mind. We get stories going all the time, what I want, what I don't want, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of this feeling of being pulled in all different directions. always feeling like there's something I'm not doing that I'm supposed to be doing, or whatever it may be, some existential angst. I'm sure we all have a sense of this. And in terms of a unified mind, so a unified mind, this can arise quite naturally in our day-to-day experience, particularly if we're doing something that we truly love, such as listening to a beautiful piece of music, or writing, or a beautiful sunset in nature, something like that. If you paint while you're painting, if you sing while you're singing, if you dance while you're dancing, whenever it may be, these high points in our lives, these points that are, these events, these experiences in our lives that are actually characterized by a sense of wonder and a sense of ease, where it feels like there's no separation between ourselves and the experience that is presenting itself to us. So I think the image of being awestruck in nature is a very, very good example of what's being pointed at here by these factors of dhyana, by a unified mind. So if you've ever been awestruck in nature, you may notice when you look back upon this experience, the quality of mind, the qualities of mind that are present, and also the qualities of mind that are absent. So in terms of what's present in this experience of being awestruck in nature, well, the mind and the heart, and the body for that matter, are wholeheartedly attending to this present moment experience. Let's say of a beautiful sunset. So there's nothing left out. So you remember that diagram of all the arrows kind of going in all sorts of different directions? Well, in the presence of this beautiful sunset, all those arrows just simply align effortlessly and naturally and are now attending to wholeheartedly to this beautiful sunset. And in this experience, there is a sense of ease, a sense of wonder, a sense of spaciousness, a sense of connectedness. Right? We can actually have this experience of feeling a part of nature, a part of this beautiful unfolding, rather than separate from. We feel connected with it. There can be joy, there can be bliss, this sense of rapture, awestruck. So this word up here, one-pointedness, this is quite a dry word. And I much prefer this image of a unified mind for one-pointedness. One-pointedness. Right, so this is commonly referred to as a state of flow, sort of psychological terms. So it's not something mysterious that's being pointed out here. It's actually something quite ordinary. We just have to understand the conditions upon which this experience of concentration will arise. Okay, I forgot to mention what's absent. Right? What's absent in this experience of being awestruck in nature? Well, what can be absent is like ill will, right? We're just craving. I want that, this, and kind of sloth and torpor, where it's just like, oh, or restless and anxiety. It's like, okay, what's next? Just all of this, the circus of the mind. So this mental proliferation, the stories that we tell. If you look carefully at this experience of being awestruck in nature, all of that simply drops away. So the mind itself, it may or may not be silent. So when I say silent, I'm referring to like this voice in our heads that we can all hear. So in a state of deeper concentration, this voice actually subsides. and we can enter into silence. But this form of concentration does not necessarily require silence. There can still be thinking. Matter of fact, there usually is. But the thinking that's happening is all in direct relationship to this beautiful sunset. The thinking isn't about something else that's taking us away. It's totally in relationship to the present moment experience. So from the hindrances, now I'm going to jump to what are called the 7 factors of awakening. And these 7 factors are skills that can be cultivated through training the mind. So these are not innate qualities of the mind. In other words, innate being, oh, I'm born with it, you either got it or you don't. That's totally not the case from a Buddhist perspective. From a Buddhist perspective, all things change, we can change. And that's why liberation is possible, is because we can change. So these qualities that are listed behind me, these are all skills that can be cultivated. So when our minds are distracted, when they're immersed in ill will or immersed in desire for sense pleasure, whatever it may be, that actually blocks our ability to cultivate these skills. They hinder our ability to cultivate these skills. And we actually need to cultivate these skills because these are the factors which incline the mind towards nibbana, incline the mind towards freedom. And we can actually say that actually the arising of any one of these has the taste of freedom within it. It's a movement towards freedom. Right, so in the same way that the Buddha spoke about the 5 hindrances as, leading to blindness and that sort of thing, leading to vexation, he speaks about these 5 hindrances as He also speaks with great conviction about the benefit of these 7 factors of awakening. So here I'll just read the quote that I wrote there. Bhikkhus, which is a word for monks. Bhikkhus, the 7 factors of enlightenment, when developed and cultivated, are noble and emancipating. They lead the one who acts upon them to the complete destruction of suffering. Right, so now we can begin to get a sense of what this Satipatthana Sutta is pointing us towards. It's pointing us towards these 5 hindrances, which are categories of experience, which hinder our progress. And they also point out these 7 factors of enlightenment. And to cultivate these 7 factors of enlightenment, we have to actually eradicate these 5 hindrances, and we need to cultivate these 7 factors of enlightenment. So then the next question is, well, what's the Buddha's advice on how do we go about doing this? And what does the sutta say about this? Okay, so I've relisted the 5 hindrances here. Doubt and indecision, ill will, aversion, desire for sense pleasure, sloth and torpor, and restlessness and worrying. And right now I'm just going to talk about this pair here of ill will and aversion and desire for sense pleasure. These 2 hindrances, this pair of hindrances. So in terms of these 2, these two can capture why we suffer. Right? Why we suffer. So traditionally, with regards to the Four Noble Truths, which are actually included in the Satipatthana Sutta, the fourth noble truth, the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Life, we don't always get what we want, therefore we suffer, simply put. The second noble truth is the cause of suffering, which is traditionally stated as greed, hatred, and delusion. So we can say that this is the greed part of that, and this is the hatred part. And greed and hatred actually arise from delusion. But I'll say more about that next week. Yeah. So we'll just talk about greed and hatred here. So the reason we suffer is, some of you may have seen this diagram before, because I've showed it to you before. The reason we suffer is because we want to control our experience. And we want to control it such that we get what we want, and we get rid of what we don't want. So the strategy here is, there's something I want, and I fixate upon it. And instead of just wanting it, I must have it. I must have this. Or the opposite is true. I must not have this. I must get away from this. And sometimes things work out the way you want. I got what I want, now I'm happy. Sometimes it doesn't. No, I didn't get what I want, now I'm unhappy. Likewise. And then this happiness, we know from our direct experience, is that this happiness, it doesn't last. It's very ephemeral. It's not reliable. And it certainly doesn't qualify as the complete extinction of suffering. It's only a very temporary, ephemeral, temporary absence of suffering, if you will, when we get what we want. So what's behind this is, this kind of demanding attitude, this controlling attitude that we have with our lives. It's all about me. It's all about me, me, me. And the strategy here is to control one's experience. So again, when we look closely at our experience, we'll notice there are a vast array of things which are beyond our control. Completely beyond our control. So this notion of trying to control our experience, it's fundamentally a losing strategy. And this is why this leads to suffering. So what's the path forward here? How do we transform? How do we eradicate greed and hatred? What does the Satipatthana Sutta have to say about that? So in this sutta, as well as in pretty much a vast number of Pali Canon suttas, there will be these repeating refrains where the Buddha will say the exact same thing over and over again, but just change one word. So it can be a bit challenging to try and read the Pali Canon because of this. And to kind of take a step back, the reason his teaching appears in this way is because when the Buddha was teaching 2,500 years ago, Buddhism was actually an oral tradition. So this was just simply a teaching technique to help his disciples memorize the teaching. Because all of this had to be put to memory. So it was only maybe about 300-400 years, something like that, after the Buddha died, before his teachings started to be written down. So it was an oral tradition for several hundred years. So that's why you'll get this sort of repeating refrains. So in this refrain, I've just underlined ill will, which is one of the 5 hindrances. And you can imagine this refrain reoccurring 5 times, where instead of ill will, you would say desire for sense pleasure, followed by sloth and torpor, followed by doubt, etc. So this is a standard refrain in the Satipatthana Sutta about how to respond creatively to the presence of ill will. So the first instruction the Buddha gives, it's really contained in these first 2 lines, and this is absolutely essential, is we need to actually apply our minds, mindfulness, to know what is present and to know what is not present. This gets repeated over and over again by the Buddha. It says, "Here, monks, when ill will is present within him, a monk knows ill will is present within me. Here, monks, when ill will is not present within me, within him, a monk knows ill will is not present within me." Is ill will present? Yes or no? He knows how ill will that is not yet arisen comes to arise. He knows how ill will, once it has arisen, can be abandoned. And lastly, he knows how abandoned ill will does not arise in the future. So these last 3 are related to the teaching which I referred to earlier of pratichyat samuppada, or conditioned co-arising. All things arise based upon conditions. So in this 3rd line, he knows how ill will that has not yet arisen comes to arise. So the instruction here is, we get ill, we get angry, we get frustrated for a reason. There's reasons we get frustrated. And it's actually very important to know what those reasons are, to discern those clearly. And we can also notice, and then we can also know that sometimes with reasons, like I can't stand sitting in traffic. It just kind of drives me up the wall. But sometimes that condition, I just can't avoid it. I have no choice. So the second one here, he knows how ill will, once it has arisen, can be abandoned. So sometimes we'll just find ourselves in a situation where we just don't like it. We get bent out of shape. We get frustrated. It happens. Life happens. And here the Buddha is advising us to actually, when we find ourselves in that situation, well, first we have to know that ill will is present. And then we actually have to have strategies for abandoning this ill will. So the strategies here, there's a number of examples that are listed in the Pali Canon. And this is actually something that we each need to figure out for ourselves. What's my strategy when I find myself in that really bent out of shape place? What do I need to do to engage in damage control? What do I need to do to pull myself out of that ill will? It's something we all need to explore for ourselves and answer for ourselves. And this last one is, once we begin to develop this skill of abandoning ill will, of eradicating ill will, well, we also have to develop the skill of ensuring that it does not arise again in the future. And the only way we can do this, abandon, he knows how to prevent ill will from arising again in the future. Well, in that case, we actually need to know what those conditions are for abandoning ill will. So, what we're going to do next week, is we're actually going to explore different ways of abandoning ill will. Abandoning actually all of the 5 hindrances. So I'll be sharing some different examples with you, also from my own experience as well. And then we'll also be diving into this aspect of wisdom, about what is meant by nirvana, complete and pure liberation. So just to give you a little teaser on that, And when I use the example of ill will, I hate getting stuck in traffic. Right? So the strategy may be, well, don't get stuck in traffic. Don't drive in traffic. You know, which can work. It definitely works a lot of the times. But the Buddha is actually pointing at something much, much deeper in terms of liberation. Is the Buddha is pointing at, well, even when one is stuck in traffic, that still does not perturb the mind. No. We can still be completely at ease when stuck in traffic, experiencing joy and bliss, peace when stuck in traffic. It's a very tall order. But we will be exploring that next week. So, it's 11:53. Do we have time for a few questions?
Yeah, just one or two maybe.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Al?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you. I appreciate your clarity and unique kind of presentation. I've been allowing a lot to consideration of the binary nature of our conditioning, and it really struck me how your descriptions of nirvana did not contain any binariness. That it was neither light nor dark, and all those other things it was not. And it's an interesting dilemma because, as Roger said, we began being conditioned from the moment of birth, and some of that conditioning, a lot of it is very necessary in order to grow up and make our way through this world, which is founded, sometimes it seems, on binary thinking. Just all that came up for me during the talk, and I appreciate it very much.
I'll speak more about that next week. Yeah, thank you, Hal. Roger.
Sorry, I'll do it again, but the idea of ill will, okay, that, what strikes me about that is if I've been hurt by someone, you know, and I've got somebody in mind particular, that I don't want to wish them ill will, and I wish them well, but there's this boundary now of trust that I won't allow to be crossed. And somehow I'm thinking to myself, well, this is still kind of ill will, isn't it? You know, and how to deal with that attachment.
That's a great question. Wow. Well, I may or may not say something about that next week. But what I would suggest is for all of us to think deeply about that question. Because it's a fantastic question, and I can only answer that question for myself, but I cannot answer it for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. My host, yes, please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. There's some hot water for tea. There are some vegan treats. If you do have tea, please put your cup in the sink when you're finished, and I'll take it. There's a sign-up sheet if you want to get on our mailing list over in the credentials over here. I will be coming around with a donable suggested donation to meet the expenses of our Sangha. It's $10, more or less, depending on what you feel moved to share. Around 12:30, some people gather at the front door to go to lunch together. Anybody's welcome to join them. I'm also the coordinator of hosts, and we have a need for maybe one or two more volunteers to do fill-in duty in that regard. It's an easy task, and I can let you know what's involved if you talk to me during the social hour. We particularly need somebody to fill in at the end of December.
Any other announcements? Hi.
Yes. On November 22nd, which is Thanksgiving Day, there will be a traditional GBF Thanksgiving potluck at my place in East Bay. And if you're interested, please let me know, because we usually try to coordinate dishes, and everybody's welcome, and to bring themselves as well as your friends. But we do ask people let us know in advance. It can be either the day before, so that we know approximately how many people are going to be there, and we can be sure that we'll have a variety of dishes. And there are flyers out there on the credenza, so if you're interested, please take it. And if you have any questions, please talk to me during the social hour. Thank you.
Legendary fun. Any other announcements? Okay. So Danadasa will be back next week. Thank you. And let's gather for a dedication of the
I've been invited to do the dedication. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.